In June 2022, my friend convinced me to run a 5K race with him. The event was to take place in November. It had been a while since I had run long distances, but I agreed to participate for a couple of reasons. This was a new experience, an interesting challenge, and served to keep me in shape. I decided to just jump into things and ran a 5K on a Saturday morning. Man, was this a mistake. My feet were killing me for the next 2 days. I had trouble walking, but the pain eased the more I ran. The first couple of Saturdays, I ran without any music, and after a couple runs, I decided to run while listening to music from my iPod Nano. I felt music to be a motivator during workouts before, and I wanted to see if it would improve my performance for the event. I saw some slight improvements here and there, and got to thinking about how music can affect our moods, so I decided to read into it. Musicophilia, Tales of Music in the Brain by Dr. Oliver Sacks explores the place music occupies in the brain and how it affects the human condition. I've had this on my bookshelf for some time and thought I would go more into detail on the various ways music can raise our moods or deepen our sorrows. Now, music is composed of different elements such as texture or tonality, but the book goes into greater detail on music and the brain itself. I'm not too familiar with our brain structure and functions, so it was interesting to see how injuries to the brain and the brain's programming affects how people can interact with music. There are several unique stories, but here are some that surprised me. Dr. Sikorsha, an orthopedic surgeon, was struck by lightning in the face after speaking on a payphone with his mother. He was resuscitated by CPR and decided to rest at home instead of going to the hospital. There were some lingering memory problems, but several types of brain scans did not show anything wrong. Several weeks later, he developed an insatiable desire to listen to piano music that seemed to come out of nowhere. He played piano as a child, but never took interest in his lessons. This time, he purchased records, he took in a piano and started playing it, and then started hearing music in his head. It first started in his dreams, but soon began to continuously run through his head to where he had to work on making it stop. There was a struggle to note down the music he heard in his head on paper to make sense of it, to be able to play it. For Dr. C, this new inspiration never deserted him. Even years later, after making a full recovery from a motorcycle accident that caused broken bones, ruptured spleen, perforated lungs, and head injuries. Neither the accident nor the head injuries ruined his passion for playing and composing music. Whereas Dr. C was struck by lightning, Eric M., a musician and teacher, his invasion of music in his head was the result of a tumor of low malignancy, otherwise known as an astrocytoma, in his left temporal lobe. He was operated in 1993. This reoccurred 10 years later, but by this point the tumor was inoperable. With its regrowth, Eric had repeated seizures in which he did not lose consciousness, but in his words, and I quote, "Music explodes in my head for about 2 minutes. It seems ironic that music has also become my tormentor." End quote. Eric's seizures are not triggered by music, but music is a part of them, with Eric saying, "As a songwriter, I'm familiar with how melody and words seem to arrive out of nowhere. This is intentional though. My seizures are beyond all of this." He is unable to interpret and understand musical elements based entirely on what is only heard, but has composed music inspired by it. One of the questions I asked myself while reading is the music being heard in your head just a hallucination? According to Dr. Sacks, musical hallucinations can be caused by strokes, cerebral aneurysms, or malformations or sensory deprivation as a result of too little stimulation via extreme conditions, so to speak. When it comes to the type of music heard, musical hallucinations draw upon the musical experience and memories and tend to reflect the tastes of the times, but that is not always the case. When brain imaging was done on those who heard music, activity was shown in the temporal lobe, frontal lobe, basal ganglia, and cerebellum, which are all activated for music. The reason we don't hallucinate all the time is because of sensory inputs. Our eyes, ears, and other sensory organs inhibit any backflow of activity from our cortex to our periphery. But a critical deficiency that does cause a backflow of activity produces hallucinations physiologically and subjectively indistinguishable from perceptions. Several years ago, I went to Nashville, Tennessee with a group of college peers for a week-long national conference. We spent a day to explore Music City, going to the Musicians Hall of Fame and Museum, walking into every bar downtown, and being surrounded by music everywhere we went. Well, we had stopped by a place to eat, and after our meal, the waitress that served our table gave each of us a note with a handwritten quote. Each one was different, of course. And here's mine. And those who were seen dancing were thought insane by those who could not hear the music. Love on, Sam K. At the time, I thought this quote was correct. However, I learned that deaf and hard of hearing can experience music through rhythm. I saw a news story about a Coldplay concert in Costa Rica where deaf and hard of hearing were able to experience music with sensory vests that vibrate in sync with the music. There was also a sign language interpreter who performed the entire concert in Costa Rican Sign Language. The vest and sign language interpreter helped increase the visual aspects of the concert and made it a more inclusive concert experience for a broader audience. While researching, I learned that Chris Martin himself, the lead singer for the band, has tinnitus, which is a form of hearing loss described as a ringing in the ears. Recently, I read an article on ESPN about Gallaudet University's football team and their use of rhythm to indicate to its players to stretch. Gallaudet University is the only higher education institution in which all programs and services are specifically designed to accommodate deaf and hard of hearing students. So when coaches hit the drum, the players feel the vibrations and stretch accordingly. The article also explains a bit on other interesting ways Gallaudet accommodates to the deaf and hard of hearing, which you can read into by clicking the link below. With the loss of one sense, the brain will reorganize itself to compensate by strengthening other senses. This is true for blindness as well. According to Dr. Sachs, about a third of the human cortex is concerned with vision. When vision is lost, there is an extensive reorganization and remappings that occur. For blindness, the massive visual cortex is reallocated to other sensory inputs such as hearing, touch, and becomes specialized for processing these. There was a study done by the Royal National Institute of the Blind in London where they tested 32 families with septo-optic dysplasia, a rare congenital condition that leads to visual impairment. Half of the children with septo-optic dysplasia were completely blind, whereas the other half were partially sighted. The results show that the degree of blindness was equal to the stimulated musical propensities of the blind. In other words, there was far more interest in music among blind than partially sighted. This also included more exceptional musical abilities such as absolute or perfect pitch. It is about 60% more common in the blind or visually impaired compared to the non-vision impaired. To give you an idea on how it looks like to identify perfect pitch, I'm here on the online pianist website that lets you play a virtual keyboard. For someone with perfect pitch, they can tell you the distinct differences between, let's say, G2 flat and G3 flat, or even G3 flat and G3 sharp when they listen to the note. Musicophilia itself describes a grandfather describing the blowing of his nose in G minor. There are many ways to understand music, and there are numerous musicians, famous and non-famous alike, who do not let the circumstances of their birth hinder their love for music. For a list of deaf and hard of hearing and blind musicians, links are included below. As I mentioned at the beginning, music has served as a motivator when exercising. The music affects my emotions to push me past that final rep or sprint towards the finish to the end of a run. But I have also used music to lift me up when I'm feeling down, or to help me focus on my work such as instrumental music. Music is essentially emotional as it is intellectual. We may be moved to the depths even as we appreciate the formal structure of a composition. Our musicality is defined as our sensitivity to, knowledge of, or talent for music. Now these differ from Now this differs from person to person. Parts of our brain concerned with emotional responses differ from parts which perceive structure. As Dr. Sachs notes, we may lack the musical talent, perception, or cognitive abilities to appreciate music, but nonetheless still enjoy it and it gives us happiness. Or we may have a good ear and be sensitive to the formal nuances of music, but don't necessarily care for it or think of music as a significant part of our lives. But our aptitude to enjoy music emotionally can be affected by injury, but can at times keep our ability to keep our perception and skills. For example, one 52-year-old male patient who was a radio announcer suffered a dominant hemisphere stroke, which left him with a persistent change in his listening experience. He had the habit of listening to Rachmaninoff, however you pronounce that name. But the stroke caused him to lose his emotional response to music, particularly Rachmaninoff, between 12 and 18 months, meaning he had no emotions for it. He wasn't happy, wasn't sad, it was just sound. However, he continued to enjoy other aspects of his life. There was no biological features of depression reported, and there was no change in his hearing, meaning he was still able to identify speech, music, and environmental sounds correctly. Music has been therapeutic for me, and in fact has been studied through a clinical context. In the late 1940s, the idea of a formal music therapy arose in response to returning soldiers from World War II with PTSD. In 1944, the first music therapy program was set up at Michigan State University, which is still a program available today through its community music school. Dr. Sachs provides some examples of persons with a disability who were assisted positively when listening to music. Tourette syndrome is a neurological condition that causes unwanted, involuntary muscle movements and sounds known as tics. Dr. Sachs refers to David Aldridge, a professional jazz drummer who, in his memoir, Rhythm Man, describes rhythm and Tourette syndrome have been intertwined from the first day I found that drumming on a table could mask my jerky hand, leg, and neck movements. Music allowed David to mask his tics and channel his explosive energy. David describes this in his website that since 2010, he has been leading or conducting drum circles for young people with Tourette's. As Dr. Sachs explains, music here has a double power. First, to reconfigure brain activity and bring calm and focus to people who were sometimes distracted or preoccupied by incessant tics and impulses. And second, to promote a musical and social bonding with others. Parkinson's disease is usually called a movement disorder, though when severe, the flow of perception, thought, and feeling are affected as well. Symptoms include tremors, slowness of positive movement, limb stiffness, and balance problems. A fundamental problem with Parkinsonism is the inability to initiate movement spontaneously. Parkinsonian patients are always getting stuck or frozen. There is no cure for Parkinson's, but music can help to make a person move from a trance-like state on occasions. For example, Dr. Sachs tells the story of Rosalie B., a post-encephalitic lady who tended to remain transfixed each day, completely emotionless, frozen, usually with one finger stuck to her glasses. But she was a fan of music and loved playing the piano. The only way she was able to start playing, however, was by requesting her to play Opus 49, a composition by Chopin whose music Rosalie knew by heart. She, as many people with Parkinson's do, lacked the power to initiate mental or physical action. By saying Opus 49, Rosalie was able to play the piano, being given some sense of reprieve thanks to the help of music. Music, like many things in life, is not necessarily enjoyed by everyone, and that's okay. What worked for some people will not always work for others, and music does not necessarily provide a cure. But as someone who enjoys listening to music and singing my lungs out while driving, it was cool to learn about the different ways people can enjoy music, the relief music provides to many going through difficult times, and the positive emotions music can bring out from all of us. One thing about Musicophilia that I did have difficulty understanding was detailed explanations about specific parts of the brain and how damage to those specific parts resulted in the changes I have described throughout this video. If you are fascinated with the brain structure and its relation to our musical capacities, Musicophilia, Tales of Music and the Brain, is a book worth reading. As for our 5K race, here is my participation medal. For the race, I decided to listen to Kendrick Lamar's Section 80, as I felt its tempo was consistent throughout the album. Although I had to stop to walk a couple of times, I have to say that I was proud of my performance. In fact, my friend and I have decided to run the same racing event next year, but we will run the 10K race. Well, hopefully. I wonder how a mix of all of my songs will help or hinder my performance. I guess I will just have to wait and train and see.